All right, welcome everyone. We got a few people trickling in, so we'll give them a minute or so to get settled in. Just from a show of hands, how many of y'all were here for our application demonstration a few weeks ago? One hand, two hands. Okay, so there's a handful of y'all. This will be very much a different type of presentation. We have, this is going to be more of a PowerPoint informative lecture style, but if you have any questions throughout the time, feel free to type in the chat. I have Ashley here, who's our assistant coordinator, and I have Roberta, who's our certifications director, also here. So between the three of us, we can absolutely answer your questions for today's, all about the certification requirements and what we're expecting to do with this new application. So, so just kind of a little bit of an idea of what we're doing today with our workshop agenda. We're going to discuss CRLA, IPTPC, review the 4 criteria for what we're doing with our certification, kind of look at best practices and discuss tips and tricks, and any Q&A you have at the end. We will be happy to answer your questions. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley. She has a quick little icebreaker to get to know who's here today. So Ashley.
Hello, guys, and welcome back for if you participated with us earlier in one of our sessions. We always would like to know who our audience is. So if you in our chat, if you would just let us know what university or organization that you're representing today, and or if you are familiar with CRLA's peer education certification. If you are already certified program, if you're just hoping to come join us and find out more about it today, just let us know in the chat. And let's see who we have joining us today. So people are familiar with tutor certification, hoping to find out more today, already certified, part of TRIO. Couple people tutoring. Awesome. Want to learn more. So hopefully today we'll be able to answer most of your questions today. I see many of you are familiar with either the tutoring side of the house or just want to find out more if you're not already part of the CRLA certification program. Great. Sounds good. We're going to turn it back over to Mike.
Awesome. So yeah, it sounds like a lot of people are familiar with the certification programs that we have. The tutoring program is also, obviously one of the longest standing programs we've had at CRLA. The peer educator, formerly known as the peer mentor certification, has been around, but not as long and not as large as the tutoring certification programs. But this slide is kind of give you a definition of what we mean by a peer mentor or peer tutor. It's just someone of similar status to the individual being mentored or tutored. And these programs will all share a similar structure, similar best practice. We kind of give you a guideline and these guideposts to build out the structure of your programs. And here you're going to learn what those requirements are, at least in the bare minimum, and how you can set up your program to succeed. So Ashley, feel free to stop me. Oops, went the wrong way. Feel free to stop me if people have questions at any point of the slide. So this is IPTPC. Again, it provides recognition and positive reinforcement for the tutor's successful work. We have a set of internationally accepted standards and skills, and it's endorsed by all of our sister organizations. Peer educator, same thing. We have a set of standards and guidelines at the minimum skills and training, and inspires peer educators to create programs that challenge the peer educator trainers, sorry. Offers campus recognition and rewards for peer educators. This has been one, like a secondary bonus for us that we've seen that students at UT Dallas anyway really love, that that reward or recognition for all their hard work in the training and doing the peer education with their program. So a little bit more in depth about the mentoring / peer educator certification. It was established in 1998. We certify campus mentor programs or peer educator, any of that umbrella term that has, coaching, supplemental instruction, classroom leaders, things like that. We currently have over 200 programs certified or in review. And these programs are very different. It can range from large universities to hundreds of mentors and coaches to a small community college with maybe like 4. So there's a wide range of programs that use our levels 1, 2, and 3, and I'll kind of break down what those levels are. If you're familiar with the tutor side, you can kind of already have an understanding of what those levels are. But if you're brand new to certification, this workshop will help kind of break down what those levels mean and what types of programs tend to go towards the higher levels. So, all right. So speaking of levels, there's 3 levels of peer educator certification. Our level 1 is kind of like our basic or general peer educator, a certified peer educator. Our level 2 is a bit more advanced, and that's this certified advanced peer educator. And then our level 3 is our master peer educator. So again, this kind of follows along the same path as our tutor certification. I think level 1 is just your standard certified tutor. Level 2 is your advanced peer tutor. And then your level 3 is your master tutor. So we follow a very similar path with our levels. So one point of confusion sometimes is people say, well, I have to start at level 1, then I can apply for level 2. And that's not what we mean by that. If you apply for level 3 certification, it's kind of like a building block. So you are not just applying for level 3, but you're applying for level 1, 2, and 3 at the same time. Each level builds upon itself, with the certified peer educator level 1 being the base of this pyramid. And the higher you go up, the more advanced the topics get, the more hours of training and the more hours of experience you need. So with the first level 1, you're only going to have a small number of training hours and a small number of experience hours. We usually see our level 1 programs are the ones that only keep their leaders there for maybe a semester or 2. That's why some community colleges, they only have their leaders for a semester or 2 before they move on or move through their program. And then you see the ones that are level 3 typically hold their leaders for more than 2 or 3 years. That way it kind of takes that time to build up into the number of hours you need for certification. So we're going to look at kind of the components today. Really, when people apply, it looks like a lot of information that you need to put in the application, but I always kind of just break it down into 4 things. And that's the program selection, how you select the leaders, how you train them, how they get their experience, and how you evaluate them. The other things that we look for in a program certification is just kind of a rundown of the program narrative. So when you apply, if you were in last week or 2 weeks ago to our application Summer Breeze workshop, you notice I demonstrated the application and didn't really talk about where that goes afterwards, but where it goes once you submit is to a team of reviewers that kind of reviews all the information that you submitted. And what we do is we kind of look at your program narrative. So it's all the narrative that you write about the program and how you explain some of the processes of the 4 pillars: the selection, training, experience, evaluation. And we want to make sure that all of that kind of is cohesive and makes sense. So what we're going to do today is kind of break down these 4 pillars and what those requirements are for each one. So we'll start with the peer educator selection. This is the first pillar, and it kind of goes in chronological order if you think about it. First you select them, then you train them, then they get their experience, then you evaluate them. So I'm going to give that order today, and we'll start with the selection. First minimum requirement is that there needs to be a minimum GPA set for your program and the leaders. So when you are either hiring or selecting, some people hire their leaders and pay them an hourly wage or a semester stipend. Some are just volunteers. So whether your coaching program or your mentor program, whatever route you take, there needs to be a minimum GPA set. Now in the past, this used to be a 3.0. We used to say a minimum 3.0 requirement for your peer mentor. And then we found out that that's not the case. Every peer educator program is very different. The biggest example is like if someone had an academic probation peer educator program where you are using students formally that were on probation that righted their ship and they are back on track and off probation, but they're still not quite to that 3.0, but there still would be a good mentor for someone that's going through the same path. So the old requirement would, forbid them from getting certified just because we had an arbitrary 3.0 GPA. So we've changed that now. So it just needs to be a minimum requirement, whether that's 2.75, 2.5, 3.25, whatever is right for your program. That's what you need to set for all incoming applicants. That makes sense? I say that as if everyone's going to say yes. Sorry, I teach public speaking, so I'm used to having a smaller class. Okay, so that's the first requirement we look at when we're looking at your how you select your peer educators. The second one is the interview with the trainer or supervisor with the applicant. Whether it's a mentor or a coach, we need to make sure that there is an interview process, not just submitting an application and selected from a list of papers, but there needs to be an actual interview that takes place between the supervisor and the mentor, coach, SI leader, etc. And the last requirement is that there are 2 or more references from faculty or former supervisors or counselors, advisors. And this can be in many different types of formats. Some have a reference form that you already have a pre-filled out list of qualities that you would like for the mentor to have, or it could be a letter of recommendation that you choose, or it could be a reference checklist where you call each of the references and you have a list of questions that you ask that way. So there are different types that you can get that reference, but basically we need at least 2 that you can check to see how this applicant has fared in the past with other, faculty, former supervisors, etc. One optional thing that I've seen a lot more utilized in the more of the housing and RA peer educator programs is a personality type assessment. A lot of freshmen, first year leaders or freshman mentors like to use this to kind of match up similar type personalities when they're pairing mentors and mentees. This is just optional. I just threw it on there just because people have used it and found it successful in the past. But if you don't do a personality type assessment like the Myers-Briggs, you don't have to do that for your selection, but it is an option there.
I was going to say, Mike, we use it a lot in our office. We may use True Colors or Myers-Briggs. Sometimes I use it to my advantage to assign tasks or who's required to do different types of activities. So if we have an icebreaker, some of my orange leaders for True Colors, I will assign them to get the crowd going. Some of my goals for True Colors, I will assign them to make the task list or the do's and don'ts of what we're doing today, the outline. So using that to my advantage also as a leader helps organize our program to making sure I'm using the students and their strengths.
Roberta, do you want to talk about the Lassie assessment that you use?
Yeah, so with my peer coaches, what we start off having them take the Lassie, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with, but it looks at 10 critical academic success skill areas like time management, procrastination, anxiety, test taking skills, etc. And then I work with them to help them improve their skills over time. And they in turn use what they are learning in their training to help the students that they're working with. And so I find that college age students are most interested in themselves, which is fine developmentally, but then we take that and expand that to the broader audience. And then another one that we use and they're really very interested in is the Harvard, I don't know the exact name of it, but it's really their anti-bias self-examinations. And if anybody knows the correct name, please share it. And we don't ask them to share that as a group, but it helps them understand their own biases and their own preferences. And we use that as a discussion starter in how to work in a multicultural and diverse environment. And that can be really helpful. Again, starting with their self-exploration and then branching out about how they work with and how they can encourage other people to first understand their own perspective and then broaden their working relationships with others. I find that very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. So that's basically all we look for in this first pillar of selection. So those are the requirements that we need to make sure that each program are following. And again, those are the bare minimum. So don't be afraid to go above and beyond. I know when it comes to some minimum GPA, some programs have to.
Thank you, Ashley.
When it comes to interviews, some people do a group interview stage, then an individual stage, and then a stage with their peer supervisor. So there's no right or wrong answer here. It all is just what works for your program. We just want to kind of set the bare minimum example of what needs to be in place before you apply. So peer educator training. This is going to be the meat of the certification process, because this is, after all, a training certification. And so we're going to cover this part in two ways. So let me set up my screen so I can easily flip back and forth here. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of show you, go back to our application and kind of explain from there what these hours mean. So first, just with our format, workshops, courses, a combination, self-paced, asynchronous, synchronous, but the ones that need to count for training are the ones that are going to be led by a trainer. So I'm going to flip over here real quick. So let me stop sharing on this. And let me flip back over here. So what we're looking for is a trainer-led interactive synchronous workshop or seminar. And then we can look at the topics as well. Okay, so here is our application that we kind of demonstrated a few weeks ago. And I kind of, if you were in that workshop, I kind of just breezed quickly through this because I knew I was going to explain it in more depth here in this workshop. But this is the section where we ask, what does your training look like? This is for level 1. So I'm going to start with level 1. What does your training look like? Is it for credit? Is it a 4-credit course, not for credit? Is it a series of meetings? How often does it take place? Quarterly, each semester, annually, or other? Generally speaking, how many peer educators participate in your training? So this just gives us an idea of how many you're training at one time. And then 4.4 is where we get into the meat of your training. And when I say the meat of it, I just mean, if you're familiar with the old style with either tutor or mentor, we had for each level a specific list of workshops that you had to use. And then you had a few electives to kind of fill out the rest of your training. So for here, TIS refers to training that is trainer-led, interactive, and synchronous. Non-TIS refers to time spent otherwise, maybe again, asynchronous training, kind of that self-paced, developed by someone other than the trainer, whether it's time spent reading an article before a workshop. You can break it up however you want, but most of the hours need to be trainer-led, interactive, synchronous. And so when we click on here, these are the different categories that comes out with the new application. So in the past, we just had a series of 7 or 8 workshops that you needed to have no matter what kind of program you were. And then when we were rethinking the strategy of what we're really asking for, we wanted to give a little bit more leniency to some of the programs that don't fit in a typical program. structure. So here, this first one is our level 1 basics. So we've kind of chopped down the absolute minimum to these 4. In any peer educator program that you have to do these 4. You have to have a do's and don'ts. You have to have a workshop how to conduct a successful session. You have to have a role of a peer educator, and you have to have administrative policies and procedures. Those are the 4 that you automatically have to have. You cannot deviate from these 4. They all have to be there. And so what we do here is we ask how much time is spent on each topic. Now, the hard part for some programs that maybe have a long-standing workshop curriculum already built out is maybe you don't call your do's and don'ts. It's not a title of do's and don'ts, right? You may call them something else. So if that's the case, that's fine. We just need to know in the documents that you upload that, hey, I don't call my workshop do's and don'ts of peer mentoring. I call it, the mentoring 101. So here we're asking how much time TIS is spent on each topic. So if you do an hour workshop here, it would just be, let's say I do, let's do 60 minutes here. So I do 60 minutes there and maybe 0 here. It all, or if you have them read the handbook before they come to their workshop, maybe they do 15 minutes there. But this is kind of giving us an example of how you break down your workshop topics and how much time is spent on each. And this last box over here, delivery methods used in the basics. Do you do activities? Do you do part lecture? Is there a discussion at the end? We just kind of want to know what styles are you implementing in your basics training. So this one, not too much to it. Very much you have to select all 4, and that's the bottom line for the level 1 basics. Then when we start scrolling down to the next categories, you'll notice here it says select at least 2 from the communication category. So right now there are 4 options for you to choose from. So you don't have to do all 4. You can do all 4, but there needs to be at least 2 selected. So for me, we do communication styles, we do active listening. We also do question asking strategies. And I would just do the same thing. How much time is spent on each one? So this one is at least 30 minutes. This one's at least 30 minutes. Now you could do a workshop that covers both topics and it's an hour in maybe your agenda, but you need to explain that in your application that, oh, it says communication workshop, but that covers listening and communication styles all in one. So any questions on these first 2, Ashley?
There's no questions currently in the chat. No.
Good. Okay. I feel like either no one's listening or I'm thoroughly explaining. Those are the 2 options there.
Mike, can I add a comment about this?
Yeah, totally.
So one of the reasons, several reasons that we broke this down into the 4 different buckets, I like to call them, is people were asking us for more ideas and more suggestions about the topics they could use. And so we came up with this grouping. But another thing was that we were finding a lot of schools were training all in one particular area. And the training wasn't as broad-based or as diverse as what their tutors their peer educators were asking for. And so by breaking this up into the different buckets, we were helping the schools kind of have a broad-based general training program that allowed their mentors and coaches and SI leaders to get more experience in a variety of different situations and different topics that they would be exposed to once they were out there working with students. So I think you'll find it, instead of finding it restrictive, like you have to do these topics, I think you'll find it helpful that you can do these topics and you can add to them, particularly if you look at the last one, which is really a wide open area of electives where you can pick what works for your institution and your trainees on any given year, knowing that things change. At one point in time, learning styles was on everybody's agenda. Now learning styles is sort of pushed aside and people looking at different topics. So it gives you the opportunity to submit an application and then change things as time goes on without really deviating from the original plan you had, and still covering a broad-based series of topics that and we know that your trainees are getting a full, very robust training program. So hopefully you'll feel as strongly positive about it as we feel. And again, it gives you a lot of flexibility, but it also gives you some guardrails to make sure that you're delivering training that's broad-based enough to meet the needs of your trainees.
Good. So again, we have our basics up here, and then communication, which we covered, learning or study techniques here, advanced study skills, goal setting, time management, use of graphic organizers, learning theories, course syllabus analysis. Again, you don't have to do all of these, but you do have to do at least two. In the ethics and equity, for example, at UT Dallas, just by being a student employee, they have to do all three of these. So we would check, if I was submitting for renewal, we would be checking all three, even though you only need to do at least one in this section. So, and then finally, like Roberta said, the electives. If you're stopping at level one, you can absolutely substitute an elective from another level here, whether it's critical thinking, gender identity, stress management. If you're not using it to count for the second level or the third level, you can absolutely use that as an elective. Or if you have a specific, workshop that you need to cover specifically for your university or college, or your specific program, you can absolutely do that here. And then here, just kind of explain what your other electives look like. So that covers level one. Those are the topics that you'll see there.
Mike, I'm sorry, can I share one more bit of information? I'm not seeing it here, but when you look at the application itself, you'll notice that quite a few of the topics have a little asterisk next to them. Anytime you see that asterisk, that means that topic can be delivered concurrently to more than one peer educator and or tutor group at the same time. So let me see by show of hands, how many of you are responsible for multiple groups of either peer educators, so tutors and coaches and mentors, that you're responsible for overseeing multiple groups? Okay, so now this is going to be a real time saver for you, in that if you're doing that, you can bring those groups together for shared training on any of those topics that have an asterisk next to them. The advantage there, it saves you time and energy, but it also allows you to create sort of synergy between your multiple peer educators and tutors. And we felt that that was a really important thing to allow us to kind of broaden the training and bring those groups together. So you can thank us later when you find out that you don't have to do the same training over and over again to the different groups. Okay, now I'm done, Mike.
No, that's great. So that was all for level one. If you are moving or doing a level two, this is where you would do your level two curriculum. It's very similar. You'll notice a few changes. Instead of select all for the basics, you can see it says select review, because that's the required. You have to review level one topics, plus 2 additional topics. So whether that's motivational techniques and establishing boundaries. If I just did those 3, that would be enough to give credit to the level 2 basics. Again, it's just the minimum, so you don't have to do just the minimum. If you need probing questions because you're an SI program, that's definitely one of the ones that you need. So you'll see the same categories here, though. You'll see communication, learning and study techniques, ethics and equity, and electives. But again, down here, you'll notice, because we're not doing all of them in basics, these numbers have changed too. So now communication is still at 2. So whether that's role modeling and working with faculty staff, learning and study techniques has gone up to 3. So you need at least 3 of the 6 to get credit for level 2. So let's do memory, let's do critical thinking, and let's do stress management. And then ethics and equity, again, you'll see universal design, gender identity, race, class, privilege. These are, again, some of the ones that we've seen throughout a lot of the programs, and we thought it is nice to choose just one, again, at least one from that list. And then the electives looks a little different than the level 1, but you can still substitute if you're stopping here, or if you didn't use one from level 1, you can include that in your level 2. So this is where you need to get strategic, so you're not having to redo topics or step on any of the level 1 workshops from there. So that's kind of what level 2 looks like. And then we go down to level 3, and you'll notice very similar. Level 3, you have to review level 1 and 2. And then you can see how some of these are way more advanced than just the do's and don'ts of a peer educator, right? So conducting programmatic needs assessment, that's where you get into your team leaders, people that are going to help you develop and assess the programs. This is why we call this the master peer educator, because they're learning a lot more than just being a general mentor or coach or SI leader. They're learning the deep stuff on how to run programs. They're learning theories. They're doing a deep dive. So that's kind of why we call that the master level peer educator.
Mike, one of the questions, and Roberta, that some of the topics are crossed, like we talked about. I think Roberta mentioned about the asterisks, and somebody wanted to know, is it possible to submit the same material for both applications?
Yeah, so that's, again, if it has that asterisk next to it and you notice, let me go one for sure that I know is on both. I think probing questions is for sure on both. So yeah, if you run the same, if you have the same material, you can absolutely submit the same. For us, when we do our like probing questions with our tutors and our mentors, we make sure that we have examples from both areas. That way they can still have a generalized view. So if you looked at our probing questions training materials, our reading, or our handouts, or our PowerPoints, you'll see that it kind of sways back and forth. And when it does a scenario-based question, it kind of, one uses a tutor example, one uses a peer educator example. But again, the base content there is the same, right? It's the use of probing questions isn't going to drastically change from a tutor to a peer educator. The techniques are still mostly the same. So yeah, so you can absolutely upload the same materials should you choose to be using that to count for the curriculum for the peer educator.
But as Mike's saying, you need to make sure that it's customized at least enough to fit the audience, right? So as long as you're doing that, and that the tutors versus the peer educators would recognize that, then it's fine.
Good. So good question. So I'll keep going down these level 3 topics. Again, communication, you'll see these a little bit more in depth. Professional communication, those are people that are going to be maybe interacting with faculty and sending emails, with the program name behind it. So you want to make sure that those emails are professional. But here again, you're just picking 2. And then learning and study techniques, you're picking at least 2 of the 3 here. But you can just tell by some of the workshop titles alone that these are more in depth, more serious, and more leaning on the side of, running a program as opposed to just being a piece in the program. So it is the deeper you go, the more advanced that the peer educators will get. And that's kind of where that scaffolding comes from. And that pyramid that you saw, like, it all builds on top of each other for your curriculum. So any questions on the topics part? This is how you build out your training. We will have, Ashley, is it next Tuesday, the SOA?
Yes, next Tuesday at, let me figure out what time. At 2:00.
Okay. So that's a big one, because when we're looking for, sorry, I'm going to reshare my screen over here. When it goes back down here with your standards, outcomes, and assessments, that's kind of what Ashley will be talking about next week, about how to build those out. And we've gone over the required topics and the length of time. Again, I haven't really covered the length of time, but I have this pretty chart in the next slide that kind of explains it. So when you're talking about peer education training, in the past, if you've been, if you've applied as a peer mentor, back in the day, the hours used to be 15 hours. So we've kind of matched the tutor side on that and brought it down to 10 hours for level 1. And then level 2 is you have to be level 1 certified plus an additional 10 hours. And that's what, I showed you on the application. And then level 3 is you have to be level 1 and 2 certified, and then an additional 10 hours of training. So altogether, level 1, 10 hours total. Altogether for level 2, it's going to be 20 hours of training. And altogether, level 3 is going to be 30 hours, 30 total hours of training. And so that's kind of going back to my previous talk about, you can see how difficult it would be if you only have a leader for a semester or two, and they move on after that. It'd be very hard to get 30 hours of training in that window. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be a lot of sweat to get through 30 hours of training, not just for the peer leader, but for someone that is actually doing the training. So when we talk about which level are you going to apply for, whether it be level 1, level 2, level 3, we always ask you to take two things into account. First, how many people do you have helping run the training? How are you by yourself putting on all these workshops? Do you have other people helping? That's going to be your first one. And 2, is it just feasibly possible for them to get through all the training needed and the length that you typically keep them? So for us at UT Dallas, we have a level 1 mandatory requirement after your first semester. And we do that because they have to go through the mandatory new leader training that is about 7 hours, and then they tack on 3 hours of monthly training throughout the rest of their first semester there. So if they've gone to the mandatory training, they should automatically have enough training hours to be certified. So that's what we do at UT Dallas. Not every place has a mandatory level 1 requirement or level 2 requirement. Level 2 and level 3 are optional for us. So you don't have to go to level 2 or level 3 if you don't want to. We typically see that reserved for people that want to have more experience. They want to be more involved with the program. They typically stay 2 or 3 years for us. And those are the ones that you see turn into the peer supervisors, the team leaders, whatever you call them.
I was going to say, Mike, we have a similar process at my institution. We do a good bulk of the training before classes start in 2 days. But then the hours we don't keep up or to meet the level 1 training, we'll space it throughout the semester. So if there are hours like do's and don'ts of peer mentoring or peer educator, some of the office type things, I'm trying to think what other ones, anything that's necessary for them to meet and do their jobs well initially, we try to knock those out early in August. And then some of the other ones, we kind of built in a regular rotation twice a month where we meet and continue training throughout the year.
But then if you also think about how much time they need to actually be delivering services, direct services to students, there's no way that in a typical year, the student can do more than 1 level, maybe 2 levels, because not only do they have to do the training, but they have to do the direct service. So it's highly unlikely that in a 2-year environment, they're going to be able to get to complete the level 3 training and the required service, direct service.
Okay, we have a raised hand. You can unmute yourself and ask your question if you would like. Or you can type it in the chat, either way.
All right, I'll give them a second to type in the chat. But yeah, if there's any other questions about training, this is the part where we want people to feel comfortable building out their curriculum. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is asking if they can work in a similar program outside the institution. So once you're certified through the program, they can take that certification and use it. We've seen, I have a number of students every year come back and say, you'll never guess, during my interview for my other job, I told them that I was a level 2 certified peer mentor, and they knew what that was because they also did it in school. And when we say it's internationally recognized, people know what it means to have this certification behind you. And once you get that certificate, so we absolutely recommend, once you're certified through that program, by all means, take it and use that as documentation that you've been through the training, you've been through the experience. You can absolutely use that in other places. So I hope that answers the question, but that's kind of what we pitch to our leaders is, hey, you can use this certification after you leave UT Dallas. Like, you're going to take these skills and move through your career and be ahead of a lot of people because you know how to do a lot of these advanced workshops. So when we're pitching our level 2 and level 3 workshops, we definitely use hey, you're going to be able to use a certificate later in life. And hopefully you run into someone that knows exactly what that means. Going back to hiring, is there a required grade a potential tutor needs in the course to be tutored? Roberta, you know more about the tutor side than I do.
Yeah, for tutors, usually it's a 3.0, but again, that would depend on your institution. What's considered, we're looking for typically a B or B plus or higher.
Yeah, so when it comes to us in the peer educator side, when we have an academic role, so like we have our SI leaders. For us at UT Dallas, we have an A- or higher for that program specifically. But I've seen programs that have it B- or higher. I've seen you just need a passing grade to be a tutor or mentor. So it really just depends on the program needs. For the peer educator requirement, we only say a minimum GPA needs to be set. If you want to throw in additional requirements, like you have to have a B+ or higher or a B or higher, or a C+, I mean, if you want to throw that extra requirement, that's totally fine. We just want to make sure in terms of CRLA's requirements, minimum requirements, that you have a GPA minimum set in place.
So it's a little bit different because as a tutor, it's content specific. Whereas a mentor, a coach, even an SI leader, it's not so much about content as it is about strategies. And so it can be a little more lenient.
Great. All right, so we've knocked out 2 of the pillars so far. We've knocked out our selection pillar and we've knocked out our training pillar. So now we're going to talk about the 3rd pillar, which is the experience. So what we're looking for here is the second part of what the leader cares about, right? Because the leader doesn't care about, in terms of getting certified, the leader cares about 2 things. 1, getting enough training hours. 2, getting enough experience hours. Once they meet those 2 things, then they are certified through your program. So how do they get that experience? Again, this is where we have a lot of discussions with programs that are applying. And this is probably one of the most common things that pop up in the application that we have to come back and kind of get clarification on, is this peer educator experience. And what this means in as simple of terms as I can put it is experience hours equals contact time with this mentee, right? So what that doesn't mean is that they're just sitting in an empty office doing paperwork for 2 hours. You can't count that as peer educator experience. You can only count the contact time they have with the mentee. And that would be examples that would be just a one-on-one session, a coaching session, or even counts even if it's a virtual meeting. So if they're either emailing them or texting them, those all minutes count for the peer educator experience. What we're asking here, when you're applying for certification, we're asking, the big question is, how do you track the experience? So for some programs, it's easy. It's easy to track the experience, like an SI program. You can see when they come, how many students come into an SI session via a session log. You can see when a student comes into a coaching session because there might be a coaching log. It's harder when you have like our freshman mentor experience. they don't have regularly set meetings. They do their experience. They meet with them outside of school hours. They, go to a sporting event with them. They go to a little coffee shop and chat for an hour. So we're asking here, how are you tracking those hours and making sure that those are all contact hours and not just, oh, well, they submit a timesheet with just hours on it and there's no description of what those hours mean. So that'll be one of the red flags we see as a reviewer. If we see when you submit the documentation and the application, if we see it's just a time log and there's no indication of what that time is spent on, we'll come back and say, well, how do you know if this was them and sitting in office hours or if this was them at a coffee shop with their mentee? So that's kind of the biggest issue that pops up here in the peer educator experience is that we want to make sure that you can track the time the peer educator is spending with their mentee. Does that make sense? And so the breakdown between the hours. So again, this is where you're talking about level 1, level 2, level 3. I know a lot of programs that may have a robust training and they may have 30 plus hours available to the peer educators, but just by sheer, functionality of the program, they're never going to hit 75 hours meeting with the mentee. So this is kind of where the two things that you have to kind of weigh when you're deciding which level to go to is, do I have the appropriate training curriculum and bandwidth to set up the training? And then 2, will the peer educators get enough contact time with the students to hit level 2 or 3? Okay, so those are the things that you need to think about when you're weighing your options on levels 1, 2, and 3.
Roberta, there's a question about on the tutoring side of the house, will they still be using the formula for tutors who work in large open labs?
Okay, so that was a noble idea, but it was too confusing. And so we've dropped that. And what we're doing now is we're letting you tell us how you do it. You can continue to do it that way if you like, or you can do it any other way that works, as long as you can clearly explain to us, and let me highlight, underline, and bold the word clearly, and if it works for you. The other idea was a good idea, but it was rather confusing. What we're interested in is making sure that if you have an open drop-in lab, that you're not just counting the time that the tutor is there, i.e. their attendance, but you're counting somehow the time that they're working with students. And the problem that we have in many of the labs is that the tutors will circulate amongst a large group of students and they may offer only 5 minutes worth of help. So it takes longer for them to keep track and document it than they're actually spending with a student. But if you have a way that works for you and you can explain that to us, the ideal way would be having them keep a list of the tutor, of the tutee they're working with, or the mentee or coachee that they're working with, and then record the time that they started with them and the time that they stopped. And you can send us those logs minus the student's last name and ID number, or anything else that works. We'll leave that to you to figure out, and we'll be happy to accept it. If you're struggling with it, you can contact one of us and we'll help you figure out something that works. But we want to keep it as simple and straightforward for you and for us and for the reviewers as possible.
Roberta, I know you said the formula was confusing. Can you remind people what the formula even was?
It had to do with, it was the number of tutors you had and the number of students you had minus, I think it was 20% for no-show and downtime. But then it got confusing. If you had a small group of people, did you count all of them for the same amount of time, or did you count them as a group? And it just got to be too cumbersome for anyone to keep track of, both for the applicant and for the reviewers.
Yeah, no, and that's what we've seen in the peer educator side. It's if you're having a program that is outside the, like a coaching session, you met with the coach for an hour, like that is something you can easily track.
Right.
SI gets a little bit different because if you had an SI leader and you had 10 people show up, and they worked for an hour, you can't count that as 10 hours.
Exactly.
That's an hour of experience. Yeah.
And then for us, for example, with our coaching program, we had a lot of on the fly kinds of things where a student would stop a coach in the hallway and ask them a question. Well, how do you track that? So that, that's where we tried to come up with some formula that worked. And, it's a challenge, but we'll leave it up to you as applicants to try and figure out what's a good way that works for you, that's legitimate and genuine, that you can then share with us.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a wrong answer here, as long as you can, like Roberta said, clearly explain how you're tracking the experience and how each peer educator is getting that experience. The one thing that I found that's kind of helpful for at least our tutor side, and it's helpful when we have these ad hoc sessions with our coaches, is we kind of just really take a look at what a normal week looks like, and we kind of do what Roberta said and do almost a minute by minute input of what the reaction experience happened that week, so we can kind of gauge what a typical week looks like, and then use that as an average, and we kind of average those things out. But again, there's a lot of different answers that could be right here. So whatever works best for you and your program. At the end of the day, that bottom line here on the slide, we just want to make sure that experience equals the contact time with the student. And however you decide to figure that out, that's up for you to decide.
And we trust you as professionals that you're going to do the right thing, that you're not looking to cheat, that you want to be honest and forthright. And it is a challenge sometimes to record some of these things. So we want you to do what works for your institution, as long as you're being forthright and honest about how you're recording it. We're going to trust you.
Good. All right. So the last pillar is the evaluation pillar. So the first three, we've selected them, we've trained them, they've got their experience. Now this fourth pillar is the evaluation pillar. How are we going to evaluate the peer educator or mentor? And it really, there's only a few things that we need. That it has to happen at least annually. So once in the calendar year. The mentees need to evaluate their mentors. So there needs to be some sort of survey or some sort of evaluation from the mentee side, that what their experience was like. And then finally, that the results are shared with the mentor or coach or SI leader. Those are the three things we're looking for. We want to make sure it happens, that the mentees have input, and that all the results are shared so they understand what that feedback is when they're looking at their performance for the semester or the year. We do ours on a semesterly basis. So again, this is just the bare minimum. We also do kind of a 360 evaluation. So the supervisor will evaluate them, the mentee will evaluate them, and then a colleague, a fellow mentor or coach will also evaluate them. So they get this kind of 360 view from the supervisor, from their colleague, and then from the mentee to get that feedback shared with them. So this is the last stage of certification, and it's kind of the quickest one. No matter what level you do, each of them have to occur across all levels. So no matter if it's just level 1, level 3, all these things have to be in place for each level.
I was going to say, Mike, the thing that I see the most sometimes programs leave out is that the evaluation is shared back with the students or the students in the program. So just making sure that you are documenting how you're sharing out the information with the mentees or the peers.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's right. So once you compile all that and you upload it in that application that I'd shared, then that's it. Those are the 4 pillars we're looking at, plus whatever narrative you have to add to those, to those pillars. But here's kind of just a general overview. Right now, you see the levels 1, 2, and 3 on the left, the training across the top, and then what application fee per level. So what we're looking here is where you're coming in. And this is every time you apply, whether it's a new application, and I'll get to that in a second, or a renewal, that is when you submit the application fee. So you're not having to submit it annually. You only have to submit the fee on your new application and on your renewal application. So level 1, $150, and that's for the program. That's not per leader. That's just $150 for the program. Level 2 is $250, level 3 is $350. It gets a little bit more complicated if you have multiple programs using it or multiple campuses or locations. But just the general idea is every additional program or every additional campus that you're doing it is just an additional $50 on top of the base fee. So when you get your certificate, this is what it looks like. This is a program certificate. You can print it out on lovely paper. We used to, back in the day, send them via mail, and that was always a disaster because Postal Service isn't the friendliest with the do not bend stamp. Some of you may know. But we also send you this certificate template where you put your name and the term and the individual. So once you're certified, we give you this certificate, and this certificate gives you permission to make these certificates. That's why we give you the template. So any leader that comes through your program that meets the requirements for whichever level you're doing, then you are able to print them a certificate on lovely paper, and it has their name and mentor. This is the mentor certificate. We also have the coach certificate. So depending on which program you're looking for or trying to do, that's kind of where you would put this information from. So now we're going to go to the cycle of the application timeline. If you're from,
Can I add one thing about the certificate? So you will get up until now, you've gotten a certificate every year for your tutors. I'm sorry, for your peer educators, correct?
Yes.
So we're going to do away with that because that was just too much work for you to have to remember to contact us, for us to have to give you the link, and it was too much that you have to remember. We just want to keep things simple. So you're going to get one certificate with the dates that it's valid for, and that'll be valid for the duration of the certification period. So it'll be either valid for 2 years or 4 years. And that's another change that Mike can explain. So you don't have to worry about getting in touch with us every year to get the new certificate. The nice thing about it, not only will you not have to remember to get in touch with us, but it'll have the certification valid dates right there, so that if every time you go to give the certificate to your tutor, you will be reminded of how long your certification is valid for. So you'll be less likely to let your certification expire than many people have been up until this point. So it'll make it easier for you, easier for us, and keep reminding you of when you need to renew. Okay.
So speaking of renewal, if you're familiar with the old way, whether it was the tutor or the mentor, this is what you're familiar with. It was the new certification was good, stage 1, it was good for 1 year. The reflection and renewal was good for 3 years on your stage 2. And then you get to your 3rd stage, and that was you're recertifying every 5 years. Again, that got complicated if you started with a level 1 and then you went to level 2, but then you were at stage 2 for level 1, but then you were at stage 1 for level 3. So we've decided to scrap all this confusion and simplify it to this new process. Anytime you are submitting for a new level or a new application for the first time, it's called a new application. That new application is good for 2 years, okay? And after that 2 years, you're gonna be renewing every 4. So if you come in at a level 2 application, you submit a new application for level 2, you have 2 years, and then you'll be submitting a renewal every 4. If at some point in time you want to upgrade to the level 3, wherever you are in that timeline, the minute you want to submit a level 3, you're just resetting your timeline back to the new application. So if you submitted a 2-year new application for level 2, and at the end of that 2 years, you wanted to submit a level 3, you would then be submitting a level 3 application, new application, that one's good for 2 years, and then you'll be renewing every 4 after that. So wherever you are in the process, it might make sense to do it towards the end of the current certification, so you're not losing those years that you've already paid for. But any new application is good for 2 years. Any renewal is good for 4. And the question in the chat, is this the same? Roberta has already answered. Yes, it is the same for the tutor side. We're trying to simplify processes on both certifications. And this is the one that will be very helpful and simplify new versus renewal. And I think that's it. That's all I had on the certifications. That's all I had for presenting the new requirements. We showed you a few of the
Two
applications.
questions. We have a hand raised. So hand raised, you can go ahead and ask your question or type it in the chat, and then we have another question.
Okay, so we're in the process. We've already done the level 2 stage 2. So we'd be looking to do the stage 3 level 2. I hope I said that right.
Yeah.
And I'm picking up the torch from a position that has been deleted at our institution. So I'm kind of jumping in first to this. And so since we're coming off of stage 2 for level 2, essentially it's due by the end of next month. So even though it's being transitioned into 4 years, I still need to submit that now.
Yeah, I would submit as early as possible. We have a small little window that we can work within, but yeah, if it's due in 2 months.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I was thinking about getting the work done. It's actually due at the end of October.
Okay, you're still good.
Yeah, I still need to get the work done by the end of this month, have it done, because it takes 3 months, right?
Yeah, we recommend at least a 3-month window. Right now, it all depends on our volunteer review team and how busy they are. Right now, we can definitely get something done between 4 to 6 weeks, but we say three months just to give ourselves a buffer just in case things pick up.
Okay, so then, okay, so still going to be held to that 3 years for this.
For this
stage.
one, yeah.
But then when I go for the renewal upon its approval, it'll be 4 years.
Yeah, it'll be the renewal application at a 4-year renewal.
Okay, thank you.
All right. People are asking, where can they find the application? And then we're recording it and it will be uploaded on the CRLA website, but not until closer towards the end of the month.
Yeah, Eric, you can watch it on the recorded that we're going to send out. Where can we access? Again, that'll be uploaded on our website, and we'll have more details once that's launched.
So what we're trying to do is get we've completed getting everything uploaded and updating the web page for IPTPC. We want to get everything together and uploaded everything for IPTPC at the same time, so that we're not going back and forth into the web page with some information current and some information not current. We're meeting right after this session to begin to plan some of that out. So our target date for IPTPC is by the end of the summer. Everything should be updated and ready to go. Right now, IPTPC is ready to go. And if you're looking, the application, if you're ready for an application now, Mike and Ashley can probably send that out to you individually if you just email them, but it's not ready to go up on the website just yet. We want to do it, as I just said, all at once so that there's not a lot of misinformation in one place or differing information in different places, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I'm gonna,
hand raised.
yeah.
And so Eric, those will be, everything will be posted on the CRLA website when we're finished with this whole series, which will be very beginning of August.
Deidre, you had a question?
Yeah, so it has a little bit to do with your timeline. I'd really like to get our application in. So we're due for tutor recertification in October. So to abide by your timeline, the hope was to get our application in by the end of this month. At this point, what I'm wondering is, in looking at the requirements for the new application for peer educator, are there schools that are opting to just do peer educator training for all peer educators, including tutors?
No, because they're different. Although some of the topics can be delivered jointly, the focus is going to be different. So
Yeah, but
you
in the
can't-
event that we did different training, okay, so for example, there would be workshops just for tutors, just for, maybe academic coaches, for peer advisors. Do we have to, part of it is that when you have 60 or 75 peer educators all at different levels, and you're trying to figure out who's being certified as a tutor, who's being certified as a peer educator. A lot of our folks start as peer mentors, then they become tutors, then they become SI leaders. I'm just wondering how you keep all of that organized in terms of which certificates you're giving to which people.
Yeah, we make sure that because each program has a program manager. So we make sure that our tutors stay with the tutor track, because they all do specialized training as well. And they have a way of tracking each of the programs there. So again, the bigger your programs are, the more processes you'll have in place to make sure you're tracking which leader is going on which path. And we have a lot of peer mentors, peer educators that become tutors. They might not do the full tutor training, but they have their peer mentor certificate with them. So they have some training, but they wouldn't be categorized as a certified tutor because they didn't go through the full tutor training there.
So that's a really good example. So if you had a peer mentor who came to you and they've done CRLA level 1 peer educator training and they have their level 1 certificate, but they just got a new job as a math tutor, what would be the next level of certification that they'd be working on?
So that depends on how you set up your training. Using that example, they would be able to use some of the trainings that could cover both tutor and mentor. So they wouldn't have to go through those again, but they would have to do the tutor specific ones that aren't, you're not able to cross over into the mentor side. So I can't tell you the number of topics off the top of my head, but I think when I looked at it, it was about 4 or 5 specific tutor trainings, the role of the tutor do's and don'ts, things like that, that are specific to the tutor track, that they would only need to take the ones that they were missing from that track to get their training counted that way as well.
And then would they be offered for their level 2, would they receive a tutor certification or a peer educator certification?
It just depends on which route they've gone down. So if they completed their level 1 tutor certification, then it sounds like their whatever route they have in your program curriculum, they would be able to take either one route or the other route, or if they were, willing to do both routes, they could do level 2 for both routes. But they have to be getting the experience hours for both as well. So if they stopped being a peer mentor and they were a math tutor, then they could go to the trainings for the peer mentor, but they wouldn't be getting peer mentor experience. So they would have stopped there and continued their math tutor experience. So if they switch one program to the other, that's kind of where their allegiance would lie, because they're not accumulating the other experience in the other program.
Thank you.
Thanks. I put my email in the chat if anyone has any questions. It's very simple, mike@utdallas.edu. Ashley, if you want to put yours in the chat as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Just a little bit more ways to connect. You can always visit our website. We'll be having some updates by the end of this month. Registration for the CRLA annual conference in November is already open. And then, of course, plugging our CRLA Summer Institute for 2022. That is kind of just a deeper dive into the things that we've looked at today and things that we've looked at for the SOAs. Roberta, do you have anything to add on the Summer Institute?
If you are new to either the peer educator field or the peer tutoring field, and you would like a really intensive learning experience in a beautiful venue, please consider coming to the Summer Institute. We only take 40 people in either track, the tutoring or the peer educator track. and we will train the living daylights out of you. You're going to be totally exhausted at the end of 3 days, but it's a fantastic experience. This will be our 4th or 5th year. We skipped last summer for obvious reasons. We're skipping this summer for those same obvious reasons, but we will be ready and raring to go next year. And we have the Institute at the Ritz-Carlton in St. Louis. And believe it or not, we get better room rates at the Ritz than we would at the Holiday Inn in St. Louis. So please consider joining us. There is some information online under certifications. And I guarantee you, you will leave there totally exhausted, but full of information that you can use. It's practical, it's hands-on, it's led by myself, Mike, Ashley, Sean, and Samantha. And I promise you, you will get tons of information and you will leave there really feeling like you've got a great handle on what you need to go back to your institution and make happen.
And we
So-
have one last question as we're wrapping up. Somebody asked, they've already certified under the old system. Do they have to recertify under the new system?
No,
Do the requirements? So
no, you would just grandfather you in. If you're currently operating under the old system for either peer educator or tutor, when you will cycle into the new system at your next renewal. And so you won't lose any time. You don't have to go back and start all over. If you go down to pull down an application from IPTPC, or when we get it posted from IPTPC, you'll only see the new application, and that will be the one you transition into. But those of you that are already midway into a certification will not lose a moment of time.
Yeah, Leslie, so you're good until that next deadline comes up. Thank you guys for coming. Again, if you have any